I would like to say that my father was a lawyer, my sister is a lawyer, but I am not a lawyer and I feel overwhelmed by the brains in this room. So I'm going to be speaking to you this afternoon, I guess from the point of view of practitioners who are working with 3D printing, who are trying to make it to do interesting and innovative things in libraries. So I'll just get my notes up. Oh, fantastic. So, libraries have been experimenting with 3D printing for some years, evaluating it as a new technology for audience engagement, trying to understand its potential for creating and making, and grappling with the challenges and opportunities of accessibility to this technology. In addition, 3D printing has newly identified potential to enable fragile collection objects to be handled, explored and interacted with, releasing them from the look but don't touch paradigm that has been necessary for their conservation and their preservation. And so in this presentation I'll explore 3D printing in libraries using examples of 3D printing that's happened at State Library here at the Edge, and profile a project that we worked on to digitise and 3D print a fragile 1950s Braille Globe. I'll also address briefly what seems to be the elephant in the room for libraries, and that's the lack or lag of understanding in the IP implications in the library fabrication or makerspace, alongside our strong commitment to open source and open licensing of both inputs and outputs. In keeping with its ongoing role as the public's on-ramp to the world of digital technology, libraries are helping people of all ages and backgrounds harness the power of this latest wave of development, 3D printing and digital manufacturing. These technologies bring digitisation to the economy of tangible things by allowing people of all ages and backgrounds to use digital processes to conceive, design and create physical objects. In 2014, data that was collected by the American Library Association and the University of Maryland found that 428 public libraries were offering 3D printing services in the US. That number was an increase from 250 the year before, and it continues to grow rapidly. American libraries offering 3D printing services also generally make the printers available to anyone with a library card at low or no cost. Australian libraries mirror this significant growth of the provision of 3D printers as a service in libraries and as a tool for community engagement, mostly for free or for low cost. Public libraries in particular have embraced the use of this technology in their library spaces and for community engagement and programming. And they've extended services and spaces to include makerspaces or hackerspaces or fabrication labs, where library users can use and create with a much wider variety of technologies for creating and digital manufacture. So how did it all explode in libraries? I think as a technology, as previously alluded today, 3D printing has existed for sort of around 30 or just over 30 years. And although it had quite quietly transformed aspects of manufacturing, the cost of entry for the equipment remained out of reach for most individuals and libraries. However, through the expiration of key patents in 2004 and 2009 and 2010, there was a proliferation of hobbyist class and open source 3D printed designs. And so by early 2012, the pricing for professional and commercial grade options from well-established market leaders appeared to be coming within the reach of the library market. So there was an opportunity of time there. State Library reflected on our Fabrication Lab journey in February 2017 in ALIA, which is the library's professional association, in their journal. And Daniel Flood, who is the lead here at the Edge, noted that We've been working at State Library through the maker and fabrication spaces for a while. It's what the Edge does, and it's what you do when you build as a library of the future. You look to the future. We were working in the maker space before 3D printers were commonplace and have been long involved in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art and maths. So we had the opportunity of price, and we also had that looking forward to future directions happening around about that same time. So 3D printing was seen in libraries as an opportunity in the way that libraries have always seen new technologies as an opportunity for empowerment, for education, for service delivery and for community engagement. How 3D printing in libraries has evolved demonstrates both the potential of the technology and the wide range of capacity of library staff, funding availability and community interests across the sector. I think it's worth for us today, for me just to talk through the model that's used at the Edge here at State Library with regard to 3D printing. This facility was conceived as a model for the Library of the Future, and it was launched by State Library in 2010. And it's got a mandate to empower Queenslanders to explore creativity across art, science, technology and enterprise. It's a space for creating creatives and a melting pot for ideas and innovation, capacity building, experimentation and innovation. In addition to 3D printers, it offers laser cutters, hand tools, soldering irons, sewing machines, CNC routers and many, many more types of technologies. And just recently, the Brisbane Tool Lab has based itself here, where people can come and borrow tools for making. When I spoke to my colleagues who work in this space, the big takeaway for me was summed up in these comments. 3D printing is the gateway drug to digital manufacturing. And you can have all the wonderful gadgets and the best location, but if you don't know how to use them or how to engage the community with them, then it's not going to work. 3D printing at the Edge in the Fabrication Lab starts with an induction workshop where participants are introduced to open source software for 3D design, electrics and coding. And the one that's used here is one called Tinkercad. And then after that introduction to the software, they make a key tag using the 3D printer. So they're inducted into the use through a practical experiment. At the end of that, they're introduced to one of the platforms that's been spoken about today, and that's Thingiverse, as a demonstration, a way for participants to get started with 3D printing. There are a number of 3D printers in the space, and interestingly, recently they've just purchased a model that can be purchased from Aldi, which demonstrates to me how far the technology has come in a few short years in terms of affordability. And they even have a 3D printer that was 3D printed as an early experimental tool to examine the potential of 3D printing. And they did that for around, I think, $400 in the time when 3D printers cost around $2,000 or $3,000. What's interesting, I thought, is the next step from that, and that was the realisation and facilitation of new ways of creating through other digital technologies. 3D printing is seen as just the beginning, where creative ideas are tested and iterated before doing something else, something more advanced and sophisticated, potentially cost-effective, such as vacuum forming, injection moulding, casting and other possibilities. So really, in libraries, 3D printing is about the technology, but it's just as much about the people who will be creating with technologies and making a low barrier to entry through 3D printing and then expanding the offer to other technologies for digital manufacturing. And as State Library has recently explored, it could also be about collections and a change in the way we might conceive of the use of fragile objects that sit behind glass, hands off. State Library holds a collection that's related to the Narberthong Special School in Buranda, which is called the Richard Frank Tunley Collection. Narberthong was established in 1963 as a school for the blind and low vision students, replacing the Brisbane School for the Deaf and Blind that was based at Annerley. The collection focuses on the work of Richard Frank Tunley, who dedicated his life to improving the lives of visually impaired children and adults through the production of Braille globes and maps, as well as models, toys, dollhouses and games. What you're seeing there is a picture of Richard Tunley, steampunked up for an exhibition we had, and on the right I'll talk more about the Braille globe. He was involved with the students at the school from the early 1920s until his death in 1968. His interest in helping blind and deaf students came from his own partial deafness, and he dedicated much of his life to working for their benefit. So apart from the teaching aids such as Braille maps, globes, models and dollhouses, he also lobbied to make education compulsory for blind and deaf children, and worked for the establishment of Braille House in Annerley in the 1950s. It wasn't until the mid-1920s that education for deaf and blind children was compulsory in Queensland. Through the Queensland Braille Map and Model Club, he also organised for educational material to be sent free of charge to schools for the blind throughout Australia and the rest of the world. So you can see why as a library we were interested in this collection and interested in this person. One of Tunley's Braille globes, which you can see in the image there, was selected for inclusion in an exhibition in 2018, the beginning of this year, called Magnificent Makers. The globe required fairly extensive conservation treatment. It was made of wood and aluminium, and then it had little Braille tags set on the outside, and you could trace your way around the map, obviously starting from the England to the rest of the world through these little Braille trails on the map. However, due to its fragility, it was not able to be used or interacted with in the way it was intended. And this was really identified by us as a barrier to access, which affects many collection items in libraries and museums. Look but don't touch might be appropriate for some collections where the visual impact is the central part of the experience. But for a Braille globe in particular, not being able to touch the Braille renders the object a mere curiosity rather than a powerful link to the experience of visually impaired children learning about the world. Funds for the digitisation and three-dimensional printing of the Braille globe were provided through a crowdsourced fundraising campaign that was led by our foundation. So 100 attendees paid $100, and there were 3 pitches, and the one that got the most votes was the project that was given the $10,000, and that was the Braille globe, which I pitched for in a highly emotive manner. 3D models were created using scanning and photogrammetry to capture the details of the globe at very high levels of detail. This was undertaken by a specialist 3D scanning service called Ditto Labs. We'd done a proof of concept just using a mobile phone, which gave really good results to the extent where we knew that this was something that was possible. The 3D models of the globe and its stand, because it sat on a wooden stand, were then enhanced and printable files were developed by a commercial provider called 1.6, who specialised in industrial design, custom manufacturing, custom plastic products and the use of high-end 3D printing. That picture there gives you an example of the Braille that was on the part of Australia. And what you can see from there is some of the Braille, because it had been used so much in the 1950s, some of the Braille had worn down. So we did a test print of a section of the globe, and it was created for review and taken to Braille House for user testing by staff and volunteers with vision impairments. And in fact, I was talking to some of my colleagues here, and one of the most beautiful parts of this whole project was that the person who tested it had used the original as a child, and it was an incredible experience of connection for them to revisit this globe. The testing, though, indicated that the Braille markings in the reproduction print were difficult to discern because the original had been worn down through use. And so it was decided that we would enhance the Braille marks on the 3D printed version. So an industrial designer who was working 1.6 stayed up very late and enhanced every single Braille marking on the globe so that it would make legible Braille, and then created the final printable files. What you're seeing there is, it's not active, it's just a screenshot, is the digital version online that's on a platform called Sketchfab. If you're looking on Sketchfab, look for Ditto Labs and Tunley Braille Globe, and you'll find it, and you can spin it around and have a look at the globe. And that's the sort of the digital version of it, which then the printable files were made. So it was printed on a multi-jet fusion printer in nylon in 4 sections that were then joined together, along with a bespoke stand, and then it was assembled. One of the things we've done is to release the files and make them freely available online for use and reuse. And we're working on FDM printers so that a domestic printer might be able to produce a smaller and slightly scaled down version of it. Just going to show you a couple of pictures of the globe itself, so you can see it's an incredibly beautiful and exact rendering of it, and in fact you can even see some of the scratches in the original wood have come out in the final version of the print. It really gave us some thoughts about other opportunities that might be available for us as a library, and perhaps for other libraries, to make 3D printed versions of collection material that is too fragile to be handled. And the learnings from this project in terms of the skill required to capture it, and then to create and enhance the digital files, and then the facilitation of the printing, has been very invaluable. And so then, I guess because we're talking about 3D printing IP and innovation, I've talked about 3D printing, something that was innovative, and so now I'll just segue into a little bit of IP. Copyright, as we all know, is both arcane and controversial, but understanding its complexities is core business for libraries, for digitisation and format shifting of collections, for both access and preservation, for the provision of copies via document supply or interlibrary loan, and for exhibition, publication, use and reuse, and also for the considerations of our collections as data. It says something that in my role, until quite recently, I had a hard copy of the 786 pages of the Act on my desk, because it's something that we refer to almost daily. I've moved into the digital age with the most recent changes. The Act itself, as also alluded to, is generally acknowledged to be rapidly falling out of date, completely out of date, and not fit for the digital world. And although there have been some very welcome changes, particularly with the duration on original works that come into play next year, there's much more that could be and should be done to make copyright work. Add to this the layers of complexities of other intellectual property law that have been discussed this afternoon: design law, trademark law, patent law, trade secrets, that all might come into play when considering 3D printing and other forms of digital manufacture, which are very new or unfamiliar to libraries. It's understandable that the policy lag or reluctance to get involved in 3D printing because we are naturally risk averse might occur. However, in response to that issue, it was said very well, again, by the American Library Association. While there's no way of predicting the magnitude of intellectual property or product liability disputes over 3D printed items that will occur in the future, this uncertainty should not deter us, that's libraries, from continuing to use 3D printers in innovative and exciting ways. Libraries everywhere are expanding the creative, entrepreneurial and educational applications of library 3D printing, and the spectre of legal action should not discourage us from searching for new ones. Additionally, we should not be intimidated by the task of familiarising ourselves with new areas of intellectual property law. And that's the ongoing challenge for libraries that I'm sharing with you today, to delve further into supporting and enabling 3D printing and digital manufacturing, and to build our familiarisation with and understanding of the impacts of intellectual property law in this space. Thank you.